Hi everyone, and hello to John the Other. This is going to be another video response to John's couple of videos now about the rape culture over there. And I'd seen he'd made another video in response to what he called an excellent comment on his first video, and I was hoping actually that was going to be a response to my video reply, but alas it was not. It was in response to a text comment someone had left. In any case, I would like some sort of a response by John the Other to my first video reply to his. He did comment on that video saying that this was a good response and that he would put together some kind of reply. And also to this one. John, in his second video on the subject, has sort of explained his position a little bit further and basically has doubled down on his assertion that the culture in Islam, amongst people in Muslim countries, which again, is vastly different, I think, between different countries. And I should say, I should preface this by saying, I'm relatively ignorant on this subject. That is to say, the only information that I have is information that I get from various different sources, both both in defense of Islam and and also people that are against the faith and who would claim that it is oppressive to women, etc., etc. I don't have first-hand knowledge, and I'm very acutely aware of that fact. I think it's probably all propaganda, and all you can do is sort of, try to digest it all and come up with what you think is kind of reasonable based on maybe the way that people, the rhetoric that's used and that sort of thing, to try to figure out what seems reasonable, what seems to be the most reflective of what probably the truth is. But I don't think any of us in the West really know. Now, if I'm to believe some of the things that I see, and if I'm to take John at his word, then I still can't come to the conclusion that the religion of Islam, or the culture more specifically of Islam, is somehow protective of women as a class. Now that's the point that John makes, is that women are actually held in high esteem in Muslim countries, and that they are a protected class. Now, first and foremost, I would say women are not a protected class. Muslim women are a protected class, if you're going to make that argument. Because, of course, there are differentiations made between believers and non-believers within the faith. And, in fact, believers who are, cloaked with a head covering are seen to be sort of clean, unless it's that time of the month, apparently. And non-believers, or women who are, exposing themselves, are unclean, and that women who are clean are not to be molested. You can draw your inferences from that, what that means with regard to the unclean women. So women are not a protected class. Muslim women are the protected class, if you're going to make that argument. I made the argument in my last video in response to something that John had said in his video, that we can easily see whether people are being protected as a class or as individuals, which I think is arguably what you want. You don't want to be protected as a class. To be protected as a class is really just to further perpetuate class discrimination, right? What we want is protections. No person shall be discriminated against on the basis of this, that, the other thing, etc., etc. To be protected as a class is just a further perpetuation of division. And it will lead to prejudice and discrimination, ultimately, right? It's sort of, to me, the same as power corrupts absolute, power corrupts absolutely. Differentiation and protection, division, will just perpetuate more of the same. But John the Other had made the comment that women are so protected as a class in Muslim countries that if a woman wants to avoid unwanted male attention and flirting and that sort of thing, all she has to do is adopt the full head covering, and she's good to go. And I made the argument, if that is the case, then we can easily test whether or not a woman in those countries is protected as an individual, that her sovereignty and her individuality is what's actually being protected here, by adopting the opposite, right? So if she wants male attention and she wants to be flirted, can she go out scantily clad and similarly be protected for that choice? And I think we all know the answer to that, even with the limited knowledge that we have in Western culture, Western civilization as to that, right? She's not going to be equally protected. Now, in his second video, he talks a little bit about the, the refugee shit show, which is to say the clash of cultures, right? You've got a bunch of people who are being, in some ways, force-fed, into other cultures. They may see an advantage there, but I don't think they really know what they're facing, especially with regards to being unemployable and things like that, and the problems that brings with it, and then the culture shock. And there's a lot of very serious issues to be dealt with there, not the least of which, of course, is this idea that we're so helpful to these people by taking them all in, when actually we could help a lot more of them if we supported them in Muslim countries instead of importing them all here. The money that we spend, in other words, could go a lot farther if we were to support them there. Even if there means relocating to another Muslim country, they would still be, ultimately much more rapidly employable and would be able to fit into cultures much more easily and that sort of thing. But John the Other, I think the whole point of his video series, and I don't want that to be lost here because I'm countering things that John has said, although I actually agree with his basic premise, that I think it's actually fairly weak of people in the manosphere to almost react with excitement at these reports of the Cologne rape attacks and things like that, because what it means is that they can divert the feminist attention to quote-unquote over there. Go attack those other guys. Especially when it's completely unnecessary. There is no rape culture here, and that's what should be being defended. Now, as I made the point in my first video on the subject, I don't think there's anything wrong with, sort of someone who's not Islamophobic, but someone who says, hey, listen, you feminists are being hypocritical here. You're not applying your critiques equally, because there is a very serious rape culture in other countries. Now, John can dispute whether that's a rape culture over there. I don't think 100% of the men have to be guilty either for something to be considered a rape culture, which is a point that he made in his video as well. But I do agree with him that it's a little bit weak and completely unnecessary to use the Muslim rape attacks as a means of diverting feminists. And I also agree with him that there was no 1,000-man or 2,000-man rape army in Cologne. However, that is to disregard completely, I think, the rape epidemics or the massive increase in rapes with the importation of Muslim men into other Western civilizations, particularly Sweden and Finland and some other places. There is an increase in rapes, and there is a differentiation again in a lot of Muslim cultures between believers and unbelievers, and the differentiation between women who are modest and clean and women who are provocative and unclean. There is a name for some of these sort of cloistering of men around a unclean woman and a sexual assault of some sort. Taharush, I think, is the name of it. Why does this name exist if there isn't some sort of a culture there? Interestingly enough, while it's sort of denying that there's a problem, John admitted there's a problem. He talked a little bit about the fact that there has been some petty theft going on, that there's been some use of sexual aggression or sexual assault as a cover or decoy for petty theft. And I found that a little bit interesting. I think if you've used sexual aggression against someone in order to steal their cell phone, they've still been sexually assaulted. It's interesting to me too to talk again about being protected as a class and being protected as individuals, individual liberty and freedom, which is what I think we should all want. You don't want to be protected as a class. That's not good. But really, are women being protected even as a class? I think what's being protected here is fertility, or even women as property. Now, I recognize that in some of these Muslim countries, women actually had the right to vote long before women in Western civilizations. And sometimes that's a talking point of some feminists, is to say, how are we to know better? It's not a feminist act to assume that you can know better for a woman in a foreign country as she walks into a voting booth, that you know better for her life than she does. Of course, the obvious counter to that would be, what are the alternatives? What does she have? A Western liberal democratic rights and freedoms of everyone choice in the ballot box, or is it all Muslim, sort of semi-moderate to fundamentalist, but all still within the same right, all within the same cultural point of view? But one thing I would say too, as another thought experiment, when it comes to these ideas of whether someone's being protected as a class or whether someone's being protected as an individual, sovereign individual, is this idea of where is the punishment for violations of this protection visited upon? And if the punishment for violations of this protection are visited upon the person themselves, then really they're not being protected, they're being regulated, right? So, I mean, obviously, if a woman goes out and she doesn't go out with the necessary 2 male relatives as some sort of bodyguards or male defense mechanisms or whatever for unwanted male attention, whatever it is that happens, if the woman does this and she's the one who is beaten or stoned or punished, house arrest, whatever actually happens, then she's not really being protected, she's being regulated. And again, this is all with just the limited knowledge that I have from the things that I see and read, from Reza Aslan all the way to the most anti-Muslim rhetoric that I see, right? I mean, that's all I can do is take in everything that I see and try to formulate some sort of an opinion. But I think if you're being punished for the violations of your own protection, you're actually being regulated, not protected, right? Ultimately, I don't agree with John on this idea that Muslim women are not being somehow predated upon and oppressed, because I don't think there's a real opportunity for them to express themselves as individuals. It is a highly traditionalist country. That's the point that John makes several times in both of his videos. And it's traditionalist with respect to, again, the protection or even regulation of fertility, but not the respect for the individual rights, freedoms, autonomy, sovereignty of women as people, nor men for that matter. Let's obviously keep that straight. But he makes another comment in his second video, which I think is really indicative of this, and he says that if Islam was predatory to women, that it really couldn't survive. Now, I think it's interesting to think of that a little bit further, because, of course, Islam is surviving quite well, I think. The birth rates, certainly, of Muslims is something that we see faring quite better than the birth rates of people in the Western world. And generally speaking, birth rates have a lot to do with affluence, right? As societies become more affluent, they tend to have lower birth rates. But this idea of Islam surviving or flourishing really is going to be with respect to how many people believe the faith, and the more that you can have birthed and indoctrinated into the faith, well, then you're going to be surviving, you're going to be flourishing. And again, I think the reason that they flourish is because they protect these traditionalist values, and that they protect and regulate fertility. And so, again, I think that doesn't speak to the individual autonomy and sovereignty of the women involved, because they have no real other choice. And because, again, this is indicative of the fact that that's what's being protected here. Islam is being touted as its own end, right? Some of the more fundamentalists and radical leaders talk about how we're going to infiltrate the world, and we're going to do it by birth. We're going to do it by birth rates. We're going to outproduce you, and we're going to even mate with your women to some degree, and we're going to spread through just pure birth rates. And obviously, implicit in that is indoctrination, right? The assumption is going to be, if we're going to birth someone, they're going to be birthed and they're going to be brought up in our faith, male or female. And that speaks more towards regulation and control of fertility than it does the respect for the individual rights, freedoms, autonomy, and sovereignty of women. And finally, John makes the point several times that these are highly traditionalist cultures, and I would agree. The thing is, with respect to the indoctrination of the youth and the threats, the implicit threats that are made with regards to leaving the faith, the control of information, that sort of thing, that directly implies a lack of individual freedom, a lack of sovereignty, and a lack of true protection for the individual. You can't really have both things occupying the same space. And so if no one within the culture is protected as an individual, certainly women can't be protected as a class, and certainly not as individuals, right? If information is controlled and there are implicit threats made within the culture to stay within the culture, then it's oppressive to everyone. And this is not an argument being made from an Islamophobic point of view or xenophobic, intolerance of other cultures. I think all cultures are suspect. Everything should be viewed through a rational and empirical lens, with a goal and a focus towards not initiating force against people, respecting individual rights, freedoms, and autonomy, and the goal towards creating a better situation for everyone. I don't see that happening over there. It's not really happening over here either. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.